Solo Leveling by Chu Gong. Chapter 46 Part 2 The Architect. Jin Woo was traveling through an endless tunnel at warp speed. He soon shot through the darkness and was flung into a blinding light on the other side. He gasped as his sight adjusted, and he took in the spectacle spreading out below him. Oh my God! An infinite army of magic beasts stood in countless rows, as far as the eye could see. There were so many of them that Jin Woo couldn't make out the ground they were standing on. It was truly a horrifying sight. If they escaped through a gate, the entire human race would be doomed. Jin Woo felt sick to his stomach. Wait a minute. Where is this? It certainly wasn't Earth. The land was brownish red and arid. There wasn't a single plant, and odd-looking, tall, thin rock formations jutted toward the sky. He had never seen such a foreign environment before. His gaze moved toward the magic beasts. There were little ones, the likes of which were commonly found in low-ranked dungeons, as well as more powerful ones such as high orcs, ice slayers, and giants. Regardless of their size, rank, or type, they were all looking up and waiting. What are they looking at? Jin Woo followed their gazes. A black lake floated up high in the sky. Or no, it wasn't a lake. It was a gate so enormous that it could be easily mistaken for a huge lake. The black hole blocked out a purple sky. A purple sky. Given the color, Jin Woo was now absolutely sure this wasn't Earth. Something was about to go down between the magic beasts and that gate in this otherworldly place. Jin Woo swallowed hard. In the prolonged eerie silence, his nervousness grew. Boom. What would come out of the gate? Jin Woo was expecting an army of humans, armed to the teeth, charging through the gate just like magic beasts did in gates on Earth. Croc! Pouring out of the broken gate were winged soldiers in silver armor. They swarmed out like angry bees whose hive had been disturbed, occupying the heavens the same way the magic beasts cover the land. It was a grand spectacle that blew Jin Woo's mind. However, the magic beasts had the opposite reaction, crying out and going berserk at the sight of the soldiers filling their skies. It was clear what Jin Woo was witnessing. This was war. Kroon! The soldiers struck the ground like silver streaks of lightning. More gates opened, and silver soldiers swarmed out. With the magic beasts on the ground and the soldiers overhead, the two hostile groups clashed spectacularly in an epic battle. Grow air. Magic beasts roared and shook the earth. Hum! The silver soldiers blew horns that sounded majestically. Weapons clashed, armor was crushed, and yells turned into screams and groans. The land was stained red. It was immediately obvious who held the upper hand. The silver soldiers easily lopped the heads off magic beasts capable of tearing apart high-rank hunters. There was no question that the monsters were outmatched, and the battle tilted in favor of the soldiers. Nonetheless, despite their assured victory, soldiers continuously streamed from the gates, and in no time, the silver waves swept over all the beasts below. Gra! Arg! What began as a battle was now a massacre, as the swords and spears of the soldiers were as merciless as Jin Woo had been with his enemies. The numbers of magic beasts dwindled rapidly. Jin Woo couldn't explain why he had mixed feelings as he watched the horrific creatures being so helplessly overwhelmed. Do I feel bad for them? Or am I jealous that humans can't have that kind of power? His musings didn't last long as something extraordinary happened next. With the complete annihilation of the magic beasts at hand, the soldiers of the sky ceased their onslaught and froze one by one. What's happening? Did the soldiers suddenly feel compassion for their enemies? No, that couldn't be it. The invading army maintained a tight grip on their weapons, but their hands were also trembling slightly. Instead of pity, their eyes were full of terror. Their gazes were trained on something behind Jin Woo. It was clear that whatever lay behind him was about to turn the tide of this battle. Jin Woo looked down instead of over his shoulder. A shadow was creeping across the brownish red terrain, quickly spreading to the dead bodies and covering the blood-soaked land below. As the shadow passed beneath the dead, screams originated from places unknown. Jin Woo couldn't ascertain the source of the cries, but he did know a skill that had the exact same effect. Monarch's domain. Shivers ran up his spine, and Jin Woo slowly looked behind him. There stood a knight covered from head to toe in black armor. An ominous, dark aura rose from the knight and the horse he rode. Could that be? Jin Woo instinctively knew there was only one name befitting this knight: Shadow Monarch. Simply being in his presence made the very air feel heavy and suffocating. Everyone, from the soldiers of the sky to the intelligent and unintelligent magic beasts alike on the ground, held their collective breath and gave the Shadow Monarch their full attention. All eyes on the battlefield were on him. Shadow Monarch glared at the flying soldiers and stretched out his hand, as if grabbing something. The aerial army flinched and retreated slightly. An eerie silence weighed heavily on everyone's shoulders. The monarch's dignified voice shattered the quiet. "Arise." "Bottom." Jin Woo's heart leaped. "Arise." That single word caused a ripple that spread out at a frightening speed, animating the shadows. The blood-red battlefield turned into rolling black waves. Grarrg. The shadow soldiers turned their dark eyes toward the enemy, their strange cries indistinguishable from angry roars or screams of anguish. There was no more fear of the enemy in those eyes. This scene was cause enough to make the soldiers of the sky tremble, but the monarch didn't stop there. "Roar!" The knight gave a mighty bellow that reverberated in Jin Woo's heart instead of his eardrums. It shook heart's knees and the land below. The shadow soldiers raised their weapons high and answered, "Roar!" With that, the shadow soldiers were transformed. Across the land, the deceased magic beasts were now shadow soldiers ready for battle. Jin Woo held his breath. He found the roar of the shadow soldiers thrilling. "Bottom!" His heart thumped loudly. If this was the peak of the Shadow Monarch's power, then Jin Woo still had a very long way to go. The hesitant soldiers of the sky were on the move again. They regrouped and then struck the soldiers in black, again reminding Jin Woo of silver bees. But these reborn magic beasts weren't as easy to defeat. Weapons struck weapons, and soldiers fought soldiers as the silver and black armies clashed and became one giant mass. The earth shook from the din of the battle. A battle that had almost ended as a one-sided massacre was a full-on war again. The appearance of just one individual, albeit a terrifying individual with incredible power, had turned the tide. Jin Woo had no idea why the system was showing him this scene, but he couldn't take his eyes off it. The battle raged. This was a much bloodier and fiercer conflict unfolding than before. While the magic beasts had been no match for soldiers of the sky and life, they were able to stand their ground as shadow soldiers after death. However, what made them truly terrifying had nothing to do with bravery or combat abilities. The intrepid soldiers of the sky still overpowered their shadow enemies in terms of fighting skills and weapons. Reincarnation hadn't helped the shadow army in that regard, so initially, it did not seem as though the scales of war had changed. However, as soon as the shadow soldiers were defeated, they immediately regenerated. "Arg!" A shadow soldier writhed in pain and cried out as it was stabbed. The silver soldier, certain of its victory, lowered its spear and drew its sword to behead the black creature. SHHHK. But as soon as the head flew off, the decapitated body and head dissipated into smoke and rematerialized whole a couple of steps away. The silver soldier flinched, and the shadow soldier took the opportunity to return the stab to the chest. Crunk! The sword pierced the silver armor and came out the other side. The soldier of the sky fell helplessly to the dirt. Thud! Its eyes lost focus as the life drained from its body. But then, it heard a majestic voice. Arise! At some point, the silver soldier realized it was holding a black spear. This was not the end for it, but rather, a new beginning. Its eyes turned solid black as it looked at its former comrades. Its former brothers in arms trembled as they made eye contact. But this new recruit knew its mission, grew, and eagerly accepted its new lot in life. Jinwoo took a wider view of the entire battlefield. The conflict between the silver soldiers emerging from the gates in the sky and the respawning soldiers in black was quite even, the number pouring out of the gate matching the ranks rising from the shadows of the dead. Is this what war in hell would look like? No human could truly comprehend the atrocities raging in this expansive land. The delicate balance between the two opposing forces shifted as soon as the Shadow Monarch stopped issuing commands to his army and joined the fray. His black horse charged onto the battlefield. Whenever he swung his sword, he mowed down thousands of enemies in his path, and the dead then rose again as his shadow soldiers. With a mere wave of his hand, soldiers of the sky attempting to flee lost the use of their wings and plummeted to the earth. Ruler's authority. The Shadow Monarch ravaged the land like a storm. For the first time since the battle began, the silver soldiers were pushed back. The millions who had conquered both sky and land were forced back by a single enemy. Jinwoo let out an impressed hum. The end looked nigh. However, just as the army of the sky was being driven back, an eerie wind blew, followed by an intense aura that brought goosebumps. The Shadow Monarch looked back even with the enemy in front of him. Two more huge gates, as large as the ones floating overhead, appeared behind him, and two distinct types of magic beasts emerged from both. One group consisted of animal-type magic beasts led by an enormous wolf as big as a mountain. The other contained knights and soldiers waving the standards of noble clans as they charged. Jinwoo's eyes widened at the sight. Jinwoo recognized all the crests on the standards. Ricardo, Pathos, Lacan, Inglias, and even Radar. Essel. They were the crests of the noble clans from the demon's castle. Jinwoo didn't have time to wonder why the demons had appeared. The animal-type beasts and the demons attacked the shadow soldiers in tandem. Those shadow ranks in their path were torn apart by the joint attack. But that was just the beginning. The mighty soldiers of the sky renewed their onslaught. With the silver soldiers in front of them, and the joint animal and demon armies behind, the shadow soldiers were surrounded. The tides of war had turned once again. Bottom! Jinwoo grabbed his chest, and it throbbed in pain. The hunter slowly shifted his attention toward the Shadow Monarch standing next to him. He could somehow sense how the knight felt. But how? Just as Jinwoo could sense the emotions of the shadow soldiers, he also picked up on what Shadow Monarch was feeling. Intense anger was boiling inside him. No, it was beyond anger. It was profound rage. Shadow's soldiers were repeatedly dying and regenerating. Though their ability to recover may have appeared endless, Jinwoo knew all too well the limits of this power he likewise possessed. It only lasts if you have enough mana. Once one's mana levels were drained, the Shadow soldiers would stay down, and the Shadow Monarch would have no soldiers to command. Jinwoo sensed that his vast store of magic power was slowly draining. The monarch turned his horse around and charged the new arrivals. The ensuing battle was fierce and resulted in piles of dead bodies and an ocean of blood. The flame of the war lit by countless soldiers was consuming all living things. However, the end was nigh. Not many creatures remained on the battlefield. The monarch himself had lost his mount during the battle, but that didn't stop him from cutting down 2 demon knights in his way. He then stood before one demon leaning against an odd-looking rock formation to catch its breath. Its face was obscured by a helmet, but Shadow Monarch knew whom he faced. "We could have ended the war today. Why did you betray me?" The demon feebly looked up. It had suffered serious wounds and was unlikely to survive. The voice that came from behind the helmet sounded near death. "What could have been? We could have exterminated all of you, but..." Shadow Monarch's voice was cold as ice. "I asked why you betrayed me." Hee. The demon laughed heartily and replied, $% %% at $. Jinwoo couldn't make out what it said. Had he misheard? No. At $$##. Though Jinwoo couldn't understand, the monarch apparently did. He reached out and grabbed the demon by its neck to pull it closer. The demon gurgled in pain. Irk! Crump! The part of its armor that protected its neck was bent out of shape by Shadow Monarch's grip. Yet, the demon made sure to relay everything it intended. $& and $$ at $& and dot. Schlick. The monarch's thumb plunged into the demon's neck. Calf. The demon coughed blood. At that moment, Jinwoo made eye contact with the demon from under its helmet. Stunned, the hunter released its neck. Whump! The demon hit the ground, lifeless. No way. Jinwoo had seen those eyes before, but that couldn't be. Ba-dump! Jinwoo's heart pounded hard. He shook his head a few times, and then cautiously removed the demon's helmet. They were definitely the same eyes. How could Jinwoo forget them? The helmet fell from Jinwoo's hands. Clang! The demon's eyes were still open and filled with burning hatred. Jinwoo had seen these eyes on the top floor of the demon's castle. Balan, the demon monarch? As Jinwoo realized who the demon was, he had another startling revelation. His hands, and his feet, legs, and chest were all covered in black armor. At some point, Jinwoo had taken control of the body of the Shadow Monarch. Ba-dump, be-a-dump, be-a-dump. Jinwoo's heart began pounding loudly in his ears. He placed his hand on his chest. Ba-dump, be-a-dump, be-a-dump. His eyes widened. How? Why didn't I realize until now? He had grown more conscious of his heartbeat after the double dungeon, yet he had failed to notice earlier. Jinwoo's trembling hand moved to the right side of his chest. He felt the heartbeat, one from the left and another from the right. Ba-dump! 2 hearts were beating as one. As he stared at the ground in complete shock, for shadows approached from above, slowly growing larger. He quickly looked to the skies. For angels, each with 6 wings, slowly descended toward him. That was the end of the memory. Ping! At the chime, he was once again surrounded by darkness. As he drifted into unconsciousness, he heard the clear voice of the system. Data retrieval is complete.